If hydraulic brakes are so good and so ubiquitous, then why even bother with cable brakes in 2025? This has been a question I've been getting a lot since I've been doing my peak mechanical videos. We're gonna get into that. And also a little bit more clarification on my recent video on the S-Ride shifters. Apparently there's some confusion as to how an 11-speed shifter could work with a 10-speed rear derailleur or vice versa. Anyways, let's get into it. So first off, let's clear up the 10-11 speed confusion. This comment here, how is it that this 10-speed shifter works with an 11-speed 105 or GRX? I get that the pull ratio must be the same, but wouldn't it not have enough clicks? I think the missing piece here is you can use a 10-speed shifter on a 10-speed cassette with a 11-speed or 10-speed road or Shimano road derailleur. Super quick rundown. I mean, if you look at any mechanical derailleur, you'll notice as you open it and actuate it, it's pretty fluid, right? There's no clicks, there's no indents. Rear derailleurs are essentially dumb. They don't know how many speeds they have. In fact, with this amount of travel, if you had a cassette small enough and the chain tiny enough, you could have 50 speeds on this one derailleur. What creates those segmented indents is the shifter. In the summer video with the S-Ride shifter, which is 10 speeds, I put on a GRX nominally 11-speed rear derailleur, and it was all connected to a 10-speed cassette. Of course, you're not going to get 11 gears in a 10-speed shifter. There's not going to be a magical click that suddenly appears in this combination. The number of speeds is going to be largely dictated by the number of speeds on your cassette. So if you got an 11-speed cassette, 11-speed shifter, then you got 11 speeds, but you could use an 11-speed rear derailleur or a 10-speed rear derailleur as long as it has the same cable pull. So it's more helpful to think of rear derailleurs not in terms of the number of speeds, but whether or not they work with the same cable pull ratio with the shifter. So the first thing to identify is, does the shifter have the same cable pull as the rear derailleur? And if so, you know, how many shifts does the shifter have? Does it have 10? Does it have 11? And then you purchase your cassette, and then you're on your way. Let's go to the meat of the issue, the topic that will most likely be on the thumbnail because people like to debate this like ad nauseum. And this was kind of inspired by a couple comments that were along this lines. This one, as a bike mechanic, you know, gotta establish that sense of expertise. I honestly see no point of using mechanical brake cables over hydraulic systems. There are so many advantages of hydraulic systems. And I'd agree, 100%. There's lots of advantages to hydraulic systems, but there's also still advantages to cable systems, I would argue. And a good analogy are these. Humor me for a second here. We've got an Apple Pencil, top of the line, and then like this kind of charcoal, actually it's graphite, if we're getting specific, drawing pencil. Apple Pencil, truly a modern miracle. Not only is it a pencil, it can be a pen, it can be a brush, it can emulate a watercolor brush, it can emulate acrylic paints, oil paints, charcoal. This can truly do it all, or can it? Because, as you can see, doesn't work on paper, doesn't work when it's not charged, doesn't work on a non-Apple device, doesn't work on all the apps. So although this is truly in many ways a modern miracle, much more sophisticated than some burnt wood wrapped up in some non-burnt wood, the humble pencil has its advantages as well. For one, it doesn't have to be charged, less expensive, draws on paper. I could draw underwater with this and it would still function the next day. It's got the broad side, you can do some shading, just like a very tactile experience. And for the price of this one Apple Pencil, I could get a lifetime of these Staedtler Mars Lumograph Black, favorite drawing pencil, by the way. So is there one that's uniformly better than the other in all circumstances? No. If I needed to make some digital art, sign a PDF, the graphite pencil would be absolutely useless. So pros and cons to everything. This is just how I approach life. I don't think there's one thing that is categorically better for all people at all times. That's just not the case. And if anyone is telling you that snake oil, I'd be cautious. You guys know I'm a big fan of friction shifters. You know, we did our collab with Mary Sales, and even in those videos, I prefaced it with saying, this is not gonna be for everybody, okay? I don't presume everyone has the same wants or needs or desires or does the same things with their bikes as I do. So I always put a big disclaimer. That's why I don't like these blanket statements. Okay, all that to say, you know, what is the point of cable actuated brakes in 2025? I can see where this person is coming from. Again, that's one thing I try to do, is like empathize and see another person's point of view rather than just write off big blanket slates. And if you only use like cheap cable actuated disc brakes, then absolutely you'd think that they're trash and there's no point. But if you do happen to use nice ones like Paul Clampers, like the Grotech Equal brakes, which are just amazing, then I'd say the braking power is almost par, maybe slightly less, but definitely good enough to toss you over the handlebars. Where I think there is a huge advantage is if you're a home mechanic and like to tinker, are always changing your handlebars, have to lengthen and shorten hoses. Again, very specific use case, but still a use case where I think a cable actuated brake is far simpler. Another instance where cable actuated brakes I think makes perfect sense is if you're going on a long extended tour, you're gonna be disassembling your bike, putting it back together, tossing it in the back of trucks, under buses, basically being really rough with them, and there could be instances where the hoses get pulled. To my mind, it seems far easier to let air into a line, which, let's be clear, air is everywhere, than to somehow snap a cable. Not to say that cables don't break, they don't fray, but let's say that they did. All you would need to do a field repair of a cable is like another cable, because you'd already have a multi-tool. You'd probably have a Leatherman with like some kind of snip so you could crimp the ends or something. But let's say the same problem happens to you with hydraulic disc brakes, and you start to lose fluid. Do you carry extra fluid? If your brakes are SRAM and they're DOT, do you also carry gloves so you can, not like burn your hands off or something? And do you carry all the little wrenches, the little syringe, the hoses, the bags? What if for some reason you have to replace a barb and olive? Do you carry a spare set of those? In terms of things you have to carry, things you have to do, the circumstances in which you would do said things have to be a little bit more antiseptic. You have to get the lever higher than the caliper. Realistically, it's just a pain in the field to do if you had to do it. And I know what you're thinking, that never happens. It happens very rarely, but it has happened to me actually on tour. This was in the middle of our big long tour, and I'd burnt my hand at the campground, couldn't get enough pressure on the brake I wanted, and I was able to switch it from regular style brakes to moto style at camp. But not to say you couldn't do that at camp with like hydraulics, but you'd have to be far more careful, right? Once you disconnect the hoses, what if you accidentally bump the lever while you're doing things? Boom, there goes your fluid, air gets in the system, your brakes are toast. I hate to belabor this point of, fixability in the field, but again, I'm responding to a comment that says, I honestly see no point. There's no point that exists where having cables would be useful, and that's where I disagree. So again, cable brakes, if you're like unclear on this point, I think they work best, or they excel in, kind of situations where you're in the middle of nowhere and they have to be completely self-sufficient. If you're traveling and things are gonna get bumped and jumbled a lot, that's an excellent instance where they excel. If you only do weekend rides or never leave town and are close to, a mechanic who can help you with your hydraulic disc brakes, and yeah, you'll never experience those things. Another instance where cable brakes make sense is if you run rim brakes. There's a ton of rim brakes out there on the market. It would suck if every shifter from this point on only worked with hydraulic disc brakes, because that renders all those bikes, we're talking millions of bikes, useless. I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I got into cycling was it was supposed to be more environmentally friendly, but this constant upgrade cycle, this constant like obsolescence, seems to kind of defeat that point. But besides that stuff, I think there are instances when rim brake bikes still ride better. In particularly the fork. Most like forks these days, because of disc brakes and in particular like flat mount, they have to be really reinforced. When I look at the fork on my Riv or the or my old All City Space Horse as cantilever, you could see the fork like flutter and move and do some work. There was a bit of suppleness and life to it, which has been kind of engineered out because of disc brakes. I mean, that's just true facts right there. Whether or not that's important to you, that's debatable, but that's just something that happened. So let's see, easy to repair, rim brakes and ride quality. I think in terms of braking power, depending on the rim brake bike or the mechanical disc, they can stop pretty dang good. The last time I went over the handlebars was actually on a rim brake bike. It was with the Paul Mini Motos. And last reason, like, why not? Why not have options? Wouldn't the world be a boring place if everyone was using the same thing like a bunch of automatons? Because it was efficient, or it's what the pros use. What kind of existence is that? That's not the world I want to live in. So there you go. That's why I think we should have at least the option of having cable actuated brakes in all the major group sets. And also, let's be clear, hydraulic brakes aren't perfect. I've had bikes where all of a sudden it became spongy, inexplicable. Maybe it was hanging up in the wall during the off season, and the bubbles got in mysteriously, and then the brakes suck. With a cable, I just kind of loosen the bolt, pull it through, and easy peasy. So anyways, that's what I think. Again, opinions, you're entitled to your own. But again, think about the pencil. Both are pretty good. They do different things really, really well, and they suck at different things. And that's just how life is. If you guys enjoyed this semi-ranty video, I didn't mean it to be a ranty video. It's just I get excited about certain topics. And if you like this focus on indie bike content that's not constantly telling you to buy the latest and greatest, then please support the channel, because that's why we have very, very few sponsors. And as always, keep the supple side down.